Don't shoot. Police around schools, just to name a few. Welcome to the revolution. It begins with you. Fannie Lou, hang and tie when it comes to this shit. 1, 2, 3, 4. We sick of the bullshit. 1, 2, 3, 4. We sick of the bullshit. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sick of the bullshit. We sick of the bullshit. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sick of the bullshit.
Says I'm muted. Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well this evening. Lots and lots of things to get into tonight, and I just want to kick it off. I do want to say, I want to start the evening by saying that my children just got home. It's 6:00. Their pickup time their drop-off time in the afternoon is supposed to be 3:40 in the afternoon. And they've just arrived. So I've, put in complaint number 1,000. Literally sick of the BS. And that's why I wanted to start off with that song today. We have a very special caregiver that's joining us today who has a podcast. So lots of tips, Jeannie, lots of tips I could take from you. Going to introduce Jeannie in a little bit, but just want to intro the topic for this evening. Thank you for joining those who are tuning in tonight. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to start introing before I say we're also going to be joined later on. Let me just say that. We're also going to be joined later on by another caregiver who is, an emerging legend. We had some of our OG legends the last live stream. And we'll also be joined by LaJoy Johnson-Law, who's with Advocates for Justice and Education. We'll be going over the State Board of Education hearing on special education that happened earlier this week. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there, and I don't think it's online. So SBOE, any SBOE folks listening to this now or anytime, please keep in mind virtual options are an accommodation for families and for people with disabilities, and for so many other good reasons we should have virtual options, if for no other reason, so I can be in more than one place at one time. But I look forward to getting that recap from LaJoy. And tonight, it's on theme with our theme for tonight. And our theme for tonight is special education and behavioral health. Lots to say about special education and behavioral health. Welcome. I see folks are commenting on the chat. Hi, Salonda. I do see you. So if there are other people that are on there, please leave a comment in the chat. This is streaming on YouTube. This is streaming on Facebook. It's streaming on LinkedIn as well as Twitter, or Periscope, which is Twitter's streaming feature. So tonight we're talking about special education. Last week we talked about, we had 3 dynamic guests, Reverend Motley, Mama Joe, Mama Salonda, and we talked at length as to the things that led up to the passage of the South Capitol Street Memorial Act, which is the theme for our Caregiver Political Education Boot Camp. So all of this, the reason why we're having these web live streams, and we'll be having them for the next continued 7 weeks, 10 weeks in total. This is week 3. And our goal is to support the political education of Black and Brown DC disabled families, and primarily family caregivers, those who are leading in the households, as well as self-advocates if they are different. So We recognize that many caregivers are disabled. We especially are here to support disabled caregivers, and we're also here especially to support disabled students. And so the DC Child Justice Coalition is a coalition that formed in 2021 to address the political education needs of our disability justice movement here. And so my nonprofit, FixPat, initiated this coalition, and we are very grateful to be joined by our partners, Servia City, Ward 6 Mutual Aid Network, Black Swan Academy, and the Police Free Schools Coalition, and Advocates for Justice and Education. We are, also grateful to be participating with a cohort of enterprising leaders on our cohort. There are over 34 people that applied. We only are able to afford cash payments for about 12 caregivers, but so many caregivers, I'm learning, have their own organizations, are in the business of advocating or improving the lives of students with disabilities, especially, and are doing big things, right, in this community. And so I'm just honored to have the opportunity to meet with so many brilliant minds. Our Monday session, so Mondays we have our private sessions, and we talked at length about special education, and we're just going to replicate some of that tonight, and going over a bit of the history, some of the events that led up to it, especially as it relates to DC. So because this cohort this year is especially focused on our efforts to amend the South Capitol Street Memorial Act, which is the DC local law that guides the school-based mental health program. And we are attempting to improve upon that law by looking at the carceral logic in the law and finding ways to decarcerate and decolonize. Carceral logic is something that we have defined here, right? We know that carceral logic is just a mentality that that suggests punishment before any other kind of intervention. And punishment can look many different ways when it comes to carceral logic. And that's part of why we're very grateful for the efforts and the works done by some of our pioneering legal advocates, who we're going to talk about at length. Carceral logic, thank you for putting that up, Nina. Right. So again, just recapping, we shared this last time. I love repetition. I think we learn best through repetition. And so I'm just going to read this again. And carceral logic references a punishment mindset or reasoning assessed according to strict principles and or beliefs about crimes, criminality, prisons, prisoners, and other institutions that also restricts human liberty, with the stated intention of correcting behavior in some manner. Carceral logic is pervasive in government systems and is not limited to criminal justice functions, just kind of what I was just saying. And so let me read this and then I'll continue the thought. But when it comes to schools, carceral logic targets multiple stakeholders, the most vulnerable being Black, brown, poor, disabled, immigrant, and queer students and their families. The concept of the school to prison pipeline is the most notable aspect of how carceral logic applies within school culture and policy making, which in turn speaks specifically to the interconnection between criminalizing functions in schools that involve a number of punishments-oriented functions. That's detention, in school and out of school suspension, truancy action steps, etc., that model the types of treatment that prisoners face within prison walls, specific to addressing behavioral health challenges in schools. This act, as in the South Capitol Street Memorial Act, was passed into law with a progressive vision to provide an preventative and early intervention tools and services, yet does so without intentionality to decarcerate and decolonize. So that means it's a risk. And so much of the law is embedded in carceral logic. And some of the ways that we kind of experience this carceral logic is how students with IEPs, which is the program that's governed by special education laws, particularly the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And as was disclosed at our last live stream, that I'm a sitting member of the Coordinating Council for School-Based Mental Health, behavioral health, as we call it in the District of Columbia. And I can't exaggerate the number of times that special education has come up in our meetings. I mean, we start off the coordinating council as a task force looking at the highest need schools where unmet mental health needs are met. And of course, these schools are in impoverished Black and Brown communities, particularly Black communities. And so in terms of the neighborhoods and the location of the high schools, which are the majority of the highest need schools, and middle schools and elementary schools. And now we're down to early childhood. And so we're going to talk about the wide range of ages and stages that impact, special education and what it has to do with our pursuit to amend this important law governing school-based mental health. Okay, so with that said, before we get to there, I do want to introduce our caregiver who's joining us that's part of our cohort tonight. I'm just going to introduce Latifa Dawkins, and then we're going to bring her on and have a dialogue for a little bit before we continue on. So Latifa is a best-selling author, podcaster, and international speaker who empowers parents with special needs kids to gain the best education experience for their child. Also, she's a mom of 4 neurodiverse children. Oh gosh, take it off, please. Take off the slide. I should have erased your contact information. Next slide. And let's actually remove that. And let's bring up, so sorry about Latifa. We're going to bring up Latifa. My apologies for that.
That's okay. That's okay.
So if you get random calls, you can blame it on me.
Okay.
Phone bills, if you get random fans there. But thank you for joining us tonight, this evening. And so how you doing? How you feeling?
I'm doing great.
Good. I mean, that bio does not do justice to what I have soon discovered, how dynamic you are as a leader, as a mother, as an advocate, as an entrepreneur. So can you just tell us a bit about, your story? Are you from Washington, D.C.? Did you grow up here? Did you go to school here? And anything you want us to know?
So I'm a native Washingtonian. I went to Black private schools up until the age of 9th grade. I'm also Muslim. So there were Muslim schools that were started by Muslim sisters who were educators, behavioral health specialists. So my mom was able to have conversations that most people don't. So I think she said she took me to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician was like, something's wrong with her because I didn't know my shapes. And there was someone in the community. That's what she did. She did assessments. She did neuropsychological assessments. So, she tested me. She was like, nothing wrong with that girl. So I come from an educational background. My mom is a teacher. My grandmother is a teacher. And I graduated from Eastern Senior High School, the original, not the charter.
Right.
And what I can say is because I did go to African-centered private schools, I was ahead of a lot of kids that were in public school setting. I graduated from Coppin State University with my bachelor's in social sciences. And I have an MBA from University of Maryland. And with that being said, my intention was never to go to a HBCU. It wasn't my intention because what was clear to me was that I wasn't being challenged in an HBC. I probably was not going to be challenged academically into an HBCU environment. Things came to me very easily just because of my foundation in education. So what ended up happening is when I graduated, I went to the head of social sciences and I said, I want to apply to NYU for cultural anthropology for a master's degree. And he told me, well, we didn't prepare you to take a social sciences exit exam. And if you get in, you will spend the majority of your time proving yourself. And I didn't like that. And I literally went into a pseudo depression. So you fast forward, and I have 2 stepkids and I have 2 biological children. I became very clear that there was a difference between white privilege college experience and your regular college experience. When you are in a privileged conversation for education, it is access to other networks, access to new other conversations, but most importantly, they're raising leaders instead of employees. And that was something else that came from my conversation when I went to my HBCU. The professor came in the classroom and he said, what are you here for? You know, we all freshmen. I'm here to get my degree in. I'm here. He said, no, you're here to get a job. That's what you're here for. Don't get it twisted. You're here to get a job. And when I had kids, I was really driven to get them into a private school setting. So because I am a native Washingtonian, when they first brought out the vouchers for private schools, we were in that lottery. However, what I realized was that getting into a private school, it is a process. It is a science. One of the things was my children were behind. So what I would do is I would go behind and make sure they were on grade level. So we were workbook family. Here's this workbook. You know, I remember my daughter was in like 3rd grade and I was on the phone at work and I was like, did you check your language expression? Did you make sure that your punctuation is right? Did you do this? Did you do that? And my coworkers were like, who are you talking to? Talk to my daughter. They was like, how old is she? 7? They're like, that's the conversations you have. That's the conversations we had. And we kept using the vouchers because back then you had to use your voucher or you lost your voucher. Right. While I was trying to get them into a top tier private school at that time, you know, I had to find places to put them. So we went to, 2 different schools. And even then, just like a lot of times you find a good public school, you're like, oh yeah, we about to rock. But what ends up happening is your kid is where they need to be. The other children are not. So they spend the majority of the school year remediating those kids. But if your kid is right on grade level, what is happening with them? So what was happening with my daughter, right, is I was trying to get her into a private school. I asked for a recommendation. And all of a sudden, they gave her, for behavior, they gave her a bad recommendation. I was like, what's happening? So I asked the teacher, this black teacher, I said, why would you do that? She said, well, she sits there and she talks a lot. I said, well, she does her work, right? Yes, but she's not allowed to talk a lot. I said, well, the problem is she's already finished. She already knows this. So can I send in workbooks for her to do? No.
Right.
No
surprises.
She has to sit here. So, me and the kids, it was a long journey. That's a whole nother segment. We end up getting an Amy Burke off of Connecticut Avenue. And she was placed in Home Arms, which is an all-girls school in Maryland, Bethesda, Maryland. Top tier, whole cultural environment. And she literally at 8th grade, she was coming to me saying, you know what, Mom, I feel like I'm letting you down. Like, I know I can do it. I can't do it. And the whole time from the moment she got into school, I would ask questions like, you're saying it takes 20 minutes for her to do her homework. It's taking her 2 hours. All kids develop differently. I don't know anybody on this call, whenever you approached a person in academia and you voice your concerns, the go-to statement is all kids develop differently. So we progress. By the time she gets to 8th grade, she's clinically depressed. So I'm Googling. I literally went on WebMD and typed in symptoms. Because I was concerned, but I wasn't asking the right questions. I didn't know how to say, I think she has a diagnosis. I didn't know how to say, well, who can you talk to? Who can I talk to? So ended up getting her tested. The school didn't agree with the testing, but here's the thing. It wasn't the kind of setting where we don't agree because it's wrong. It was, we don't agree because this is not what we're seeing. So I used my insurance to get her tested. Back then, it's like, we're talking about like 2000, maybe 2012. So
what was your deductible? Do you remember?
I didn't have any deductible.
No deductible. Okay.
I'm going to touch on this just for a hot second. When your child is tested, it's important that your child is getting tested by someone who's cultural competent, as well as that is what they do. Not, I can do that. This is what they do. So what ended up happening is, because she was on a full scholarship, the school paid for her to go to one of their testers. The fee was $3,500. They covered it 100%. My daughter has ADHD and dysgraphia. So she was having difficulties with testing because what she's thinking and what she's writing is different. Like, literally, when I went back after I got the diagnosis, I felt bad as a parent. I would say stuff to her like, why are you having a Barbie moment? Because she would be doing her work and the pen would stop. And to me, she spaced out. And I'd be like, why are you having a Barbie moment? Right? When I would read her notes, I'm like, why are you making stuff up? Like, that's not what's written down. So she tested horribly. But what broke her ultimately was, Halton said, we cannot offer her a 9th grade seat. She's not going to make it. And my daughter said, well, my friends have ADHD. My friends got dysgraphia. All I need is drugs. And I'm like, baby girl.
Who told her that? Oh, well, I guess her friends.
All her friends have.
Yeah, they've told her what they do. Yeah.
What I realized was this. We talked about, Monday, we talked about early intervention. So when you are in a privileged conversation, so here's a little tip for everybody. So you get your child tested early. Why would you get your child tested if they're not showing anything? Because they get their children tested even if they're not symptomatic. So here's the science. For a privileged conversation, what is the goal? The goal is to get your child, the end game is a top tier college, right? You want that IEP. Like, as a race, we like, we don't want it. Privileged people want that IEP, and I'm gonna tell you why. Here's the secret sauce. Because when they get to high school and they get to take the SAT, the ACT, they can get anywhere to 2 to 48 hours extra on their test.
Right, testing accommodations. That's right.
They get the testing accommodations, right?
Yeah.
Without the caveat that most of us experience, your child has to be failing, because when you're in a public school setting, they have to be failing for you to give them that accommodation. Why would you need them to be failing for them to get the accommodation? They had this diagnosis. They have it. So we're back to the conversation. Is this a privilege conversation? If we're talking about racial bias, what are we talking about? Is it just because it's in a public school setting? What's happening? So her friends all had that diagnosis. She's like, I had to explain to her, yes, they have it, baby, but they have been getting support this whole time. Like, you haven't getting support. You don't know how to navigate your diagnosis. At the same time,
how old was she at this point again?
14.
14. Okay.
So at the same time, my other son, who at that time was in high school, his school, Emmett Burke, kept saying to me, we want to get him tested. All you got to do is pay this $100 co-fee, because he was also on scholarship. And I'm like, oh man, $100. Oh, yeah. Oh, nothing wrong with him because he's not failing. He's not failing. But when it was time for him to go to high school, I was like, man, the high Emmett Burke reached out to me and they said, well, you know what? I know you didn't get him tested, but we feel like he should be. But you need to look into RSA. They'll pay for him to go to college.
Rehabilitation Services Administration.
Rehabilitation Services Administration. So I went on, ran down there. You gonna pay for his college? He had dyscalculia. He had executive functioning disorder. He went to college. He lasted a year. And I'm gonna
Did
tell you,
RSA pay for his college?
they pay. Man, listen, if you're getting RSA, you better run that play. They pay for him to go to school. They
Really?
pay for his special pen. They pay for his computer. They pay for everything that we said he needed to be successful. And but here's the piece. Because I wasn't willing to get him tested because he wasn't failing, because from where I come from and what most of us understand, if you're not failing, you don't need help, right? So what ended up happening, I was functioning as his executive functioning. So this is what executive function is for people who don't know. It is the ability to have things in order and direction. It's being able to say this is the task and how to break down that task to get it done completely. We use executive functioning every day. We just don't know that we do. But I was functioning as that. Oh, I print out your homework assignment. Like, we're talking about a child like 16, 17-year-old. I had checklists. Okay, where is it? Show it to me. Put it in a bag, and I'm checking it off. I was his executive functioning. And even though he had all the accommodations to succeed in college, that one piece, he wasn't able to be successful. And because he was so smart, for him, it was a question of intelligence. Because even when they gave him the diagnosis, he was like, I got that. Because it's easier for an individual to accept that they have a diagnosis. The earlier you can get them to understand what it is and to accommodate themselves.
Man, I'm telling you, the power of early intervention is so underscored. And yes.
It's a thing. So like I said, I have 4 kids. So right now we're talking about, I have this 14-year-old, I have this 18-year-old, and then I have my biological child at that time who was 4. He was in Lowell school.
Okay.
And they said, hey, Miss Dawkins, we do early screening for speech. Well, okay, I never heard that. I've been through 2 sets of kids. I never heard that, but sure. Okay, I guess this is what private schools do. And they came back, they said, we feel like you need to take him for additional testing. So, I went, but they told me specifically what to do. They had given me like this pre-screen. They were like, he has articulation, and he has some other things. So I was like, okay. At the same time, we ended up going into a charter school because we lost our financial aid. And before we even got in the door, as soon as we won the lottery, I was on the phone. Hey, I had my son's report. He needs speech. So when he went to Yu Ying, he had all his speech services in place. So now we're talking about kindergarten, 1st grade. Every year, I'm telling them something's not right. Literally, we had to get to the point where I said, listen, because at that time I wrote a book. Not My Child. Navigating
Not My
IEPs.
Child. You can find it on Amazon, right?
Yep.
Hey, Nina, can you find that book and drop it in the chat for folks?
And I wrote the book because
let's put that again. Can you say that title again?
Not My Child, Navigating IEPs. So what happened was I was like, what the heck is happening? So I had written a book. So I had done all this research, and I came back to the table and I said, just like this, every time I would ask for a testing, they would tell me, oh, it's okay, developmental next year. Oh, we want to hold him back in kindergarten, but it's not because anything neurological. It's just that we feel like he's just a little immature. They brushed me off for 2 years. 3rd year, this is where the cascade happened with my other kids. I said, now listen, let me tell you something. And I shouldn't have to have said this, but this is what I said. I said, my daughter has dysgraphia, and she has ADHD. I said, my son has dyscalculia and executive functioning disorder. I said, their father has bipolar disorder. I said, historically, genetically, when it comes to diagnosis, it runs in the family. I said, he has a high chance of having other diagnoses. I want you to test him. And at that time, what I didn't realize is that whenever you're holding a conversation, you might as well say it never existed. I did not know that you are supposed to write up your request and submit it. So it was little pieces that I missed, even though I still was able to get what I wanted. When we get to the IEP meeting, because I was telling Chioma, like, I literally was going through other people's IEPs. I was going to the meetings. I was explaining to them what was missing. But when I went to that meeting, they were wanted to hold the same pieces in place. They didn't want to change anything. Even though the tester had these suggestions and I went and researched all of them, they weren't open to it. But because I read the report and I went through it and I started calling people, anything that they said he was lacking or he's in low, I was on the phone trying to find a program for it. So by the time I got to that table, I was well versed. So well versed that when they were saying learning disorder specific reading, I said, call it dyslexia, call it what it is. Because I spoke to a white woman and she said, that's the new term. And they like to use that term because there's no history behind it. There's no weight. She said, make them keep saying it. Make them understand that. Make them say it. So I kept saying it until finally the special education teacher said to me, well, dyslexia is just seeing the letters backwards. I said, no, it's not, ma'am. I said, there's 3 different types of dyslexia. I said, the word dyslexia comes from the Greek word of dys.
Mama went to the etymology of the word.
I said dyslexia means lack of phonemic awareness. I said there's 3 different types of dyslexia. I said you have lack of phonemic awareness. You have the one that is also talking about the teaming of the eyes. I went in and afterwards she just looked at me. I'm like, no, we're going to do it. I didn't win that day. And I'm going to tell you why I didn't win that day. Because I knew what I wanted, but I didn't have another team underneath me. I was fighting by myself. I went and used my insurance. And I created another team around my kids.
Okay.
So when you tell me no, I would be like, well, he has a speech therapist over here who states he needs da-da-da-da-da. And when I would do that, they would give me what I wanted. I said, you're using this program. You're using it wrong. I said, yes, the program is Orton Gillingham based. However, I reviewed the directions. The directions state you're supposed to use this program 20 hours a week. He only gets 4 hours of reading intervention. I was like, he needs to be Orton Gillingham based, right? I also pointed out to them the other part. I said, why is it that the majority of children who are, when I was doing my research, the majority of children that schools are saying they're doing reading remediation are Black and brown children. You're placing them in a program that is Orton Gillingham based, but you're not testing them for dyslexia. Why is that? So you're getting the money, but you're not making sure that the children are fully covered. So, we had this conversation. I get everything for him, but I create this team underneath him. Like his team, like one of the things I was telling Tioma on Monday, not only did I have the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, I had it's a program called Spell Read to help him read. We had an integrated listening system. So we had all these pieces up under him. And when I tell you, I made myself sick to the point where my boys were saying stuff like, I'm so sorry, mommy. Because that's how tired I was. Like my Fridays was like from 12 to 4, we were in a therapist's office because both the kids were getting services. So then that kind of made me roll back with, how do your kids experience you? As caregivers, how are our children experiencing us? And I took a break. I realized that I had been burnt out, but I was able to do what I wanted to do with my oldest. Right now, he's 15. He was 2 years behind. By the time we finished, he was 2 years advanced. Literally, before I put him in a private school for special education, if we had stayed in a charter school, they probably would have moved him off of the programming. So the other thing I want to talk about real quick is Chioma mentioned behavioral health. And when you mention it, this is my thoughts. And this is something I've seen on a lot of people's IEPs, Maryland and DC. When they look at diagnosis, they want to look at what's problematic, not what's supporting a child. You have a child who has ADHD, and as a Black and brown, especially our little boys, they're not looking at the diagnosis. They're looking at the triggers that are already associated with Black males. So One, a lot of times it's hard to even get an IEP because you have to be able to say the ADHD and the inattention is what's hindering them from accessing the curriculum. Once you get that in place, then you have to fight for the behavioral support. So they'll do things academically, but when it comes to behavioral support, they'll say we're giving it, but they're real vague. You have to be specific. Well, what is the goal for them? If he is not able to hold attention, you should be incrementally being able to build that. What other accommodations can you give him? Because sometimes people with ADHD need muscle feedback. So we used to do the fidgets, but when you go to a special education school, the higher tier ones, they have things on the chair so the kids can use the rubber bands, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have standing desks. One of the things I learned when I started going to special education, high tier private schools was one, special education is not indicative of failure.
No, it's quite the opposite.
Special education does not mean you're failing. I couldn't understand when we first started. They were like, "Ma'am, we can't accept him because he's too far behind." I'm kind of like, "Well, he got special education like everybody else." And then I realized, no, it's a different conversation when you're in a privileged special education setting. You know, when it comes to remediation, which means that you are working to catch the child up to grade level, right? Most private schools, especially top tier, will only take 1.5 to 2 years. And doesn't mean across the board, but it needs to be almost there. Because if you take a child that's below that, you're in basically back to where I started, right? So your child is in the classroom. Your child is ahead of the other kids, but you're catering to the other children, not that particular child, right? So it's going to take away. So you have to be on baseline. So for right now he's 15, he got in the Commonwealth. I decided, he goes, and I'm not throwing out numbers, but just saying, I am an advocate of private schools. I'm an advocate of scholarships because that's been my thing. My son's school costs $45,000 a year.
Wow.
I pay nothing.
Oh.
So once your child gets in, which is it's a thing. It's a thing. That's my thing. I love to help people get the kids in.
Well, you better holla at Ms. Dawkins, right? Who is an advocate, a professional advocate, is navigating the system and can help you out too. So yeah, at some point we're gonna, if you could put your contact, and of course if anyone follows up in the chat, we'll be sure to connect them with you. But I do want to get your thoughts on a couple of things as you do that. Right? Like, so for those who have not participated, and who are maybe new, who have children that are new, who may have navigated the system a while back, some of the terms and some of the concepts that kind of you may or may not be able to appreciate how successful Latifah's advocacy has been without some of this foundational terminology and understanding. Now, terms like RSA, so we know that special education is a mix of healthcare and schools. So at this time, when we talk about school-based mental health, that vision was opened because of special education. Because before 1975, the highest needs children were kept out of the public school system. And there is a video clip I want us to watch and want you to live comment, but I want to wait till LaJoy gets here for us to watch that video clip on Forest Haven and get your feedback on that. But FAPE. So we talked about this too, right? And I should updated the slides to reflect, what it actually, the aspirations today. So in the law, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the things that your child are entitled to are, or terms you hear frequently, is the concept of FAPE, free and appropriate public education. But Latifah, can you enlighten us on the amended or the expanded definition of FAPE?
I forgot.
Free and appropriately ambitious public
Oh yes,
education.
we did talk about that on
We
Monday.
did. I thought you even mentioned it yesterday
I
when we
did
had.
mention it, and what that
Yeah.
means, everybody, is it's beyond basic. Free
Mhm.
appropriate public education, that's just basic education. Our kids deserve free appropriate ambitious public education. They deserve quality. More,
Yeah.
that's the thing, that as Black and brown people, we actually get taken advantage of because we fight for things because we know something's being withheld, but we don't understand what the quality looks like to advocate for it. But now we do.
Now we do, and part of how we get to this free, appropriately ambitious public education is because Chief Justice Roberts of the Supreme Court, and I just learned today, and I love my lawyer friends, that there's a current case that's being seen. I think Perez, I forget the full title. I will get more knowledgeable. I literally just heard about it this morning. It's being seen in front of the Supreme Court. And it's more about how the ADA and the IDEA interact in violations, or if within a pursuit for law. We know that oftentimes, well, for those of us who've gone through due process, we know that IDEA kind of can conflict with other laws because you got to exhaust where that can go, right, in the
Mhm.
courts before you can apply any other law. But they're cases that are complicated, right? They're issues that are complicated. But anyways, just want to just lay this terms, and then we get back to more dialogue here. But Chief Justice Roberts in 2017, at the end of another case called Andrews F. Andrews F was a Supreme Court case seen because there's a family in Colorado who paid for their child's private school, decided that they let their state know. And so just any caregiver that's on here, or any
Mhm.
self-advocate that's on here, if you're going to pay out of pocket, highly recommend that you document in writing, in email. So email to timestamped and all of that, and say, hey, listen, I'm going to pay for this, but should it win? Should it bear the outcomes that I'm hoping, or improvements? If you see academic improvements, then I'm going to want to be reimbursed. And so this family, I don't know the facts in terms of if they did document or they didn't document, paid for their child's private school on par with what we just said, and then came back to the state and said, hey, listen, you're going to reimburse us. The child is autistic, child is still alive. And the state said no. The state fought it all the way up to the Supreme Court, right? So kept appealing through every circuit court. So it was ruled in 2017. And I think, by that point, Andrews, it was an adult or it was at least out of the public education system. That's one thing that people have to be aware, that these cases, suing takes a lot of energy. It is not always great for your mental health. It is not the preferred option. But for our families, historically, we
Yeah.
have had to rely on the court system
Mhm.
to receive any kind of justice. But we know that disability justice is defined in the community, however, right? Not in the courts, right? We say when we have been unjust, we find our civil rights allies that work with us, and we get the job done. So in this case, free and public education speaks to that. Child with a disability, that's just, again, standard language in terms of, like, if your child has a disability, there are several disabilities that your child can be found eligible for. Your child, there are about 14 categories, right? And eligibility is determined by the state. In DC, we passed the law in 2014, ironically introduced by David Catania, who was the council member that we mentioned last live stream, who introduced the South Capitol Street Memorial Act. So I hope before the end of our cohort, we're able to get Mr. Catania on here to help us understand what has motivated him to pursue both school-based behavioral health, which speaks a lot to our needs, as well as amending special education, considering he was committee of health chair at the time. I believe he may have been education at some point. I don't know for a fact. Another reason we'd like to interview Mr. Catania. So, you know, other important terms, LRE, least restrictive environment.
Mhm.
Now, We know that LRE is kind of how some of us get to qualify, well, not qualify, but part of the resistance to private placement is because of the LRE rule and because states don't want to pay. They'd rather that money stay in the district, right, or the LEAs. But, you know, the spirit of the law says that, and the reason that the law was even passed is that our kids were not let into schools. This is part of what we're going to look at a little bit when LaJoy hops on here, that many of our kids were in institutions. In DC, the sordid institution and the history that it had was Forest Haven and, of course, St. Elizabeth's. These were places that high needs young people were kept. Some people would enter Forest Haven from 1 year old. Joy Evans, who we're going to look at a little bit and let, died in Forest Haven at 18 years old, entered there at 8 years old. So it's like a boarding school / torture chamber, you know, / prison. It was an awful place. But the LRE speaks to making sure that our kids are receiving education in the least restrictive environment, which speaks specifically to institutions. However, if your public school is terrible and the private school is in Virginia or Maryland or wherever you get that placement, unfortunately, I've made that choice. Latifah's made that choice. It's not an easy choice to make, to say, hey, I'm going to put my kid in a more restrictive environment in hopes that they're going to get a better education. So FAPE and LRE are not, they can be mutually exclusive, but the spirit of the law says that we hope to have both free and appropriately ambitious public education in the least restrictive environment. That's the aspiration. And they're related services. So related services can include occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, assistive technology, parent training. So as a parent, you can ask for the IEP to have a parent training session because you are trying to learn more about how to support your child's education. That is allowed. Now, do you have the hours of the day to meet the IEP hours you want on that? That's on you. And of course, it's on the school. Are they going to commit? Are they going to play Jedi mind tricks and tell you can't have parent training on your IEP? That's why you reach out to an advocate. That's why you reach out to a peer advocate, but also to our legal advocates, many of whom are also parents. And so these are the most important terms that we can go over. Thoughts? Any terms I missed out? Anything you want to add to that list? Just to give people a foundation and the basics, you know.
I don't know. You did a good job with the basics. The only thing I would add is I have a couple of parents, and sometimes we think that, you know, either we're doing the least restrictive environment, which is like a private placement, or our child's going to be in a general classroom. But you do have the option sometimes that the school may have a kind of like a pseudo least restrictive within the school. My oldest son was, when he went to Yu Ying, they had that type of program. So they had decided to take the kids within a certain age range and create a classroom for them. However, they didn't have enough kids. So by the time he was actually going to 5th grade, they told the kids they were going to close the program. And my son said, I'm out. I'm not going back to general population.
He said no. Interesting.
Yeah, he said no.
Well, I mean, they know.
But there was also, so one of the things I think one of our cohort members mentioned is bullying. And he had been for like maybe 3 or 4 years there. So you're talking about sending him back into the general, into the general population. He was like, that's
right, like prison, right?
Exactly.
General population.
We're gonna go, yeah.
Yeah. But yes, I mean, bullying is a reality, right? And there's two sides of that, right? Like some kids with behavioral health needs may exhibit those behavioral needs by bullying. Some kids with behavioral health needs may be traumatized from being bullied. right? And that's part of the depression, not wanting to go to school, the resistance to all of that. I do want to note in the images here, one more thing. So here we have the symbol of U.S. Department of Education, right? Because special education is federal law, right? So that means Congress passed it into law in 1975, right? At that point, it was called Education for All Handicapped Children's Act. And then I think in the 80s, it changed. In the 80s or 90s, it changed to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There are 4 parts to the law, right? Let me just go back to that slide. I think it still has that there are 4 parts to the law. Part A, general provisions, right? Part B, this is the focus of kids 3 to 21. Part C is birth to 3. And the reason why C comes after B is because it was amended into the law in the 80s. Just like we want to amend the South Capitol Street Memorial Act, right? People amend laws. It's a thing. People do it all the time. So heads up, City Council, when we reach out very soon, very, very soon, please don't act brand new. Okay, it happens all the time. People change laws. And then Part D speaks to professional development, technology, dissemination, and the Parent Training and Information Center. We're going to have LaJoy on in just a little bit to talk about that. And so there's 2 symbols here. So US Ed, how money moves is that money goes from education, the U.S. Department of Education, and I think it's on a rebate, right? So the states get reimbursed at a percentage of the monies they spend. IDEA has never been fully funded. So, it's, reimbursement is never at the level of expense, unfortunately. But when it gets down to the school, it looks like additional money, right? Because it technically is. The kids are coming in with more resources, which unfortunately does not always impact directly the children in which those monies were allotted for. That's for at-risk students, for homeless students, any special funding that comes into public schools, special education students, comes with some funding from the feds, no exception. But then it goes to the state education agency, which in our case is OSSE. OSSE is the Office for the State Superintendent of Education. And then the money goes to the LEAs, the local education agencies. To that point, like, there's a lot of hands, a lot of governmental hands up to the federal government that have deep interests in special education. Yet this law was passed from a grassroots effort, right? It came from people like Latifah and myself and LaJoy. LaJoy, where you at? We're waiting for you. But we may go ahead and watch the video, and then hopefully, she can comment on it just in the interest of time, so that we have, I know that she is navigating out of school time with her daughter. And so I'm sure they're in transition. And speaking of transition, maybe before I show the video, I do want to talk about a couple other things as it really, there she is. All right. So here's LaJoy. We conjured you up. I was just saying that you were in transition.
You knew it. Like, I'm at karate. I had to get Abria transition, and I'm like hustling to the car. I'm like, she told me 6:45, and I'm so late.
No worries. Of course, we know how this goes, right? And I will say this about transition, which is a key part of the ACOMO project. Special education kind of lays the ground for how transition for students with disabilities is defined. And there are many transitions in school. And the ACOMO project has a whole chapter on transition, of which we'll have a moment to talk specifically about transition. But transition is important for many reasons, right? Transition in and out of school, as in just getting to school, transportation. These are determinants of educational outcomes, right? Yeah. Transition from grade level to grade level. Like if you had a preferred teacher, a good teacher, or you're switching school, our highest needs kids are going to be bouncing from different schools all over the city, right? And that has an emotional impact on our children. Yes, it also means transition from preschool to the K-12 system. And that's a big transition, because One, you go from, your child development environment to now sitting at a desk and being required to do things that you weren't required to do potentially in early learning. But you're still an early learner. So there's that. And then there's the big transition that our kids fall off the cliff. Unfortunately, many do. We hope none of our babies end up off a cliff, but it happens to many of our, our children, right? The secondary transition. Because of Catania's local law in 2014, the Enhanced Special Education Act, our transition age starts at 14, not 16. But when it comes to school-based behavioral health, understand that transition support is not really a well thought out consideration in terms of how to transition all students, whether they have special education or not, but especially for why the law exists for these unmet needs, right? And we know that defining who, how, when, where supports happen can reduce in incidents because it's a preventative and early intervention step. If you can preempt when a child, that's the spirit of the federal law, but it's also just the nature of how young people, actually where their peaks and their valleys are in learning. So I want to, remove this and then maybe give LaJoy, we're going to give LaJoy a chance to introduce you earlier, but I want you to say a bit about yourself. And then I want you to, and then if you can, recap on what happened at the State Board of Education. And before you do that, because we're going to talk about the news, so introduce yourself, and then we're going to play a video because I like to play it. So introduce yourself, and then before we start talking about SBOE, I want to play a short intro and then a bigger video. There's a lot going on in my head right now. Go ahead, LaJoy.
I call her the doctor of everything, Dr. Oru. And I see, is that Jeannie?
Yeah.
Because I get to see all the women I love. First of all, happy Women's History Month. Let's start Happy Women's Month. But we all know, real talk, y'all, like Women's Month is every day. Women are putting in the work every day, 365 days a year, 24/7. Even when we're sleeping, we're working and thinking. I know it's
don't remind me. You see how tired I look, right? I don't sleep.
You see me in the car. I gotta be there. I gotta be there for Chioma. I gotta be there for the sisters because I just really am appreciative of all the work that you all are doing. But hey everybody, my name's LaJoy Johnson-Law. A lot of people in the community call me Miss Law. I'm a Ward 8 resident. I'm Abria's mom. Abria is a neurodiverse child who has special healthcare needs. She has special education needs. I got into this work and this advocacy work really like when she was a baby. She was born at 1 pound and 6 ounces. So at 23 weeks. So she's my miracle baby. And we've just been navigating for like the last 11 years, just really just trying to navigate everything. And it's, there have been some highs and then there have been some, Chioma and Jeannie know, like there have been some real lows, just throughout everything. But I am not going to go through all the things that I do in the community. Like nobody wants to hear my resume. Like that's annoying. I'm just happy to be here. So Chioma, I'm going to let you play your video.
Okay.
Right, like no one wants to hear me talk about like
no. I was just I can't walk and chew gum, and all this technology is it just adds more confusion to Chioma's mind here. So I can only do but so many things at one time.
Okay, you want me to stall? I can stall for you. I can stall. I got you. Do you want me to stall for you? Okay.
No, hey Nina, I'm about to call Nina out again. Okay. Nina, can you queue up the Sick of the BS? Because we like to transition this when we talk about news.
Yes. Okay. And y'all just like cue a hand when y'all are ready. But my day job though, folks, I work at Advocates for Justice and Education. I was the parent support specialist, but I've transitioned to the training and community outreach specialist. Just AJE does so much great work. And I really want to make sure that they get highlighted for the things that they do in the community. And also for them just to have a bigger reach, to be able to reach those, especially east of the river, to be able to help those families and help those children who are really going through it in regards to special education. So if y'all ever need anything, like y'all just hit me up. Y'all check out AJE in DC. I'm waiting for like a cue of a hand to be like, hey girl, all right, we got it.
Yeah. So Nina's ready. Nina, roll it.
Roll it, Nina.
Shoot, police in our schools, just to name a few. Welcome to the revolution. It begins with you. Fannie Lou, Heyman Ty, when it comes to this shit. 1, 2, 3, 4. We sick of the bullshit. 1, 2, 3, 4. We sick of the bullshit. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sick of the bullshit. We sick of the bullshit. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sick of the bullshit.
Okay. So, that was Fari's voice. And
I knew that was Fari. I was like, is that Fari?
All right. And on the Sick of the BS segment here, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what was said. Not that the State Board of Education is BS, but we know that what's happening to us is BS. So what's going on? But before you play the video, though, hold tight, Nina. Let's take that off the screen for just a few minutes. Let's talk about SBOE, and then we'll play the video. I'll prompt you. Thanks, Nina. LaJoy.
Yeah, so I think first of all, I want to talk about how blessed, what a blessing it was to see so many people come out and talk about special education. That was the first thing. Like the meetings are in person. Just to let y'all know, just like a quick PSA. The DC school board meetings are in old council chambers. So they, unfortunately, the old chambers it's not able to take technology very, very well. So unfortunately, they're not able to have a hybrid model, and they are down by the court buildings, and it's 5:30. And I just want to paint that scene because it's 5:30. That's hard for people to get to those type of meetings in person. So to be able to see that many folks come out because they're just like, again, in regards to special education, they're sick of the bullshit, right? They're just like, we're sick of this, okay? And we need to be able to put this on record. Like, this stuff has to be on public record. So when folks from council and all these other people are trying to figure out, well, what's going on? No, you can't say you don't know, because how many public records has it been on? You know what I mean? So it was really packed. And I want to shout out Laura Fuchs for a second, because that meeting was actually so impactful. And the families and the testimonies were so impactful that Laura changed her testimony. Like
wow.
Yes. So she was like, I came here to talk about, so shout out to Laura Fuchs from the WTU. She was like,
yeah, Washington Teachers Union.
Yeah. And congratulations to them on the new contract. But she was like, well, I came here to talk about social studies, but she moved her computer to the side. I was like, we need to talk about special education. Completely just started talking about the different, challenges and issues that people were going through. And I just thought that just was such a testament to everybody that was there. And then one of the biggest things, and honestly, this is just so heartbreaking. Tyler Corbett, shout out to Mother Yolanda Corbett. Her autistic son, she's one of the mothers. We are all part of the motherhood. So shout out to Mother Yo, as we call her. Her autistic son read his testimony about transportation, and we all know that he took his time, and everybody, even though he was on a timer, we all looked around. Don't you interrupt him. Don't let him. I don't care. We don't care if he goes over time. We can give him another adult's time. Okay. Let him eat into that time. Let him finish. They didn't interrupt him. They let him finish. I think he was so nervous, but he did so well. And the end of his testimony was, look, I'm just asking for 2 extra minutes for the bus. I just need an extra 2 minutes for the bus, because apparently it's like a rolling
Oh
stop
yeah, I
when they're
know it.
leaving,
You talking
and they're
about like how long they have to wait for you to get from the
right.
house to the
So
bus?
how
Yeah,
long the
okay.
buses have to wait for you? It
Yeah.
doesn't appear that anyone is getting off the bus to knock, to let somebody know you're there. A ping, a holla, a beep beep, a something. And he told the board, he was like, "Look, I'm just asking for 2 minutes." And for the very next day, for him to get left, literally he's opening the door and the bus is, I just was like, it just broke my heart, because I'm just like, we all literally just gathered at the State Board of Education to really talk about these different issues, because we want to be solution oriented. We want to solve these problems. We don't want children, getting left behind. Now he's marked as a no-show. Like, the child is just asking for 2 minutes. That's
Right.
it.
That's it.
And he's like, oh, he can't be standing there ready for when they get outside, because it may be different times. Like you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so,
no, I mean, trust me.
Let's talk about that.
yeah, like, it could be different times. So, like, we don't
Abria don't take the bus. I know what you mean.
right,
Yeah.
so and y'all, like, just for full transparency, Abria does not take the bus. And I'm sorry.
No,
Not
don't
sorry.
be sorry. You
Don't be
made
sorry.
a choice.
I'm sorry, not sorry. Because the system is broken, I just mentally, I can't take it. So I would just rather, I thank God for my vehicle, and I thank God for him blessing me and my family, for me to be able to have a vehicle to just get her across town. You know what I mean? And a reliable vehicle.
And you got to
to
go
get her.
across town. So can we
So
talk
we
about
live in
that?
Ward 8. Yeah, so we live in Ward 8, but we go to school, but she goes to the E.L. Haynes Public Charter School, the middle school campus. So there are two campuses. There's one on Kansas Avenue, which is the elementary and the high school. And then there's the middle school campus, which is on Georgia Avenue. So Abria is 11. She's in 6th grade. She goes to the middle campus on Georgia. So that's in Ward 1. So we're traveling from Ward 8 to Ward 1. Let me tell you why before y'all play this video. The reason we're doing this is because, unfortunately, the schools in our neighborhood, we actually really want to go to them, but we just can't. The special education programming was actually taken out of the school, and it went. Yeah, I know, right, Jeannie? Jeannie's looking like, what? They took it. They took. I swear, I can't. I swear, I can't make this up.
What does that mean? Taken out? What does that mean?
So, like, apparently DCPS changed the feeder patterns of the different special education classrooms. Like,
So do you know what that? Do you know? I know the chancellor testified about that at oversight here. Do you know what that rule is? Like,
so
can you say more about that? Okay.
So, from my understanding, when I talked to DCPS about this, what they were trying to do was they were trying to get families who were in the different specialized education programs to have a better feeder pattern, because apparently they were saying that things were all over the place. So they were trying to kind of tunnel, you know what I mean, to kind of have more of a not so much tunnel, a streamline, to have more of a streamlined view for families about, oh, okay, like, if I go here to this school, then I can be able to go to this school for middle school and this school for high school. So that way I can ensure that this special education programming follows. But the disconnect was, there was no real engagement with the community. There was no real engagement with the schools. Nobody knew the thinking behind it. All everybody knows is that the program has been taken away. So now my neighborhood school is no longer an option. And on top of it,
pause. Your neighborhood school is no longer an option?
It's not an option. Like, they're not going to be able to serve her. They're going to be like, hey, Miss Law, we're going to have to change her placement. But I'm like, I don't want to change her placement. I want her, like,
change her location, because legally, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. Change her
location.
Change her location for her to be able to receive the programming. And I'm like, I don't want her to go to a different location. I want her to go right here, because I love the principal, I love the staff, I love the teachers, I love everything they're doing at her neighborhood school. They're honestly, and I don't want to put them out there because I don't want to give them a press fury, but they're doing amazing stuff. But on top of the program no longer being at the school, they also just lost over $260,000, and they gained enrollment. Like, they're projected to gain enrollment and they just lost $260,000. Now, apparently, this has something to do with like one-time federal funding.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's another conversation about why.
ESSER
But
funding. Yeah.
but I'm like, why are we budgeting schools based off of one-time funding? Like, again, never mind. But that's a whole different conversation. But I'm just like, this is just, it's no, like, this option I felt was taken away. So it's not even an option. So now I'm to the point where I'm just like, I'm really tired. And we have a implementation problem and information sharing problem in DC. And I'm just like, I cannot go through this lottery process anymore. This is it. So I kind of shut it down. And I was like, look, I need, wherever she goes, they need to go up to high school so she can just graduate, because I can't do this no more. But look at Jeannie laughing at me, because I can't. I was like, this and rate my blood pressure. Y'all gonna give me wrinkles. I'm not fooling along with y'all about to give me some daggone wrinkles trying to figure out special education programming for this child when it should be right here in the daggone community. Like, that's some exact bullshit. Like, that's just bullshit. You know what I'm saying?
Sick of it.
Sick of it. It's just bullshit. So I'm just like, I can't do this. And so I need her to go up to high school. And I talked to some different schools. Now, there were some schools at DCPS that I really, really love that didn't go up to high school, but I was like, no, what, I'm gonna put them on the list anyway, because that's how top notch their programming is. But I was just like, I can't do this. I mean, I was like, so she's at Eel Haynes, and honestly, they are amazing.
Hand to hand. You shouldn't have to request hand to hand for the bus. That's an automatic rule.
It literally is. It just doesn't make sense. That whole, we won't ring your doorbell. It's just supposed to magically know we're out there.
But if you're coming at different times, how is someone supposed to be out there? Like, that's the part that I'm confused about.
It's like an hour. LaJoy, it's like an hour.
I can't.
So, Nina, can you cue up the video? I want to argue that we do not have a communication or a whatever dissemination problem. We have an ableism problem, right?
That's part of it. It's a whole lot of problems, but that's part of it.
Let's start. Let's play this. I want you to get you guys' thoughts.
Right. To call the parents and tell them that Joy
Actually, can you
had
go
an
back
accident.
a few more minutes? Like, yeah, right there. Back to 3 or 256. Go back 256. Or no, other direction.
Look at Dr. Oru directing.
Okay.
Hey, right, look at her directing. Come on, director. Come on, director.
This is a sad story too. Okay.
When we went out that Sunday to see Joy, she was not in her cottage, and they told us that she was in the hospital, but we had never received word that she was in the hospital. They didn't think it was important enough to call the parents and tell them that Joy had an accident.
When we went out there to see her, she was in the hospital and she had bruises all over her, and nobody could explain why she had the bruises.
And I was on my knees praying, God, help Joy. Please don't let her be injured. Please don't let Joy be injured. And I heard in my spirit, you do it. And I said, do what? You help Joy. And I got up off of my knees, and that's when I said, I'm going to take care of my daughter. And when I said I wanted to see the superintendent, anyone in charge, and they took us to the office, and they brought staff people in. And as Harold said, when we complained that we had not been notified of Joy's injuries, and why did she have the injuries in the first place, they said, well, if you don't like it, take her home. And I said, well, I'm not going to take her home. I'm going to see you in court. And that was the beginning of our struggle with Forest Haven.
We parents noticed that there were different things going on in Forest Haven against the clients that were out there. That was no good. So that's why we decided we had to close Forest Haven. And we worked with the district government and the federal government to bring our children into the district, into group homes in the District of Columbia.
The class action suit filed by the Evans on behalf of their daughter Joy and other family members resulted in the closing of Forest Haven. With this brought an impetus for major systems change in our community and our government, resulting in significant public policy agendas that protected these individuals as they moved into the community. Individuals were then given the opportunity to hold jobs, to live in a variety of settings with other people, apartments, community residential facilities,
Okay,
intermediate
let's
care
stop.
facilities. This was
Okay, thanks. So, all right, so that's about Forest Haven. It's a longer video. It's a very emotional video. Shout out to the Georgetown University Center for Child and Human Development that created that video a few years ago. So you guys know about Joy Evans, right? Like we hear that name a lot, right? I mean, no, I didn't wait just because her name was Joy. I wasn't trying to pull your strings.
You're so
but
yes.
So
The Therapeutic Rec Center is named after her.
Yes, exactly. So Joy Evans, she was a young person. She was 8 years old when she was institutionalized at Forest Haven. And, she was born in the 60s. And her parents, Harold and Betty, who I'm obsessed with. Like I presented a COPA a few years ago and just, honoring like their struggle as Black parents that recognize, that there was a civil rights aspect to this, right? So Joy, at 18 years old, like what Betty was saying, like, well, I'm gonna see you in court. The year that her case went to court, which was 1976, Joy died. Right. Joy was 18 years old. Joy supposedly had aspiration pneumonia, which, is a disease that you get if you are not mobile or if you were neglected. Joy did not seem to have a physical disability. So it wasn't as if she was bedridden or had motor skills that would, motivate that aspiration pneumonia. So she was essentially abused to death, and so that's what created the Evans case. The Evans case closed in 2017. And as in the consent 2017. So Betty had died. Harold died in 2019. So this is in our lifetime. Joy has a sister and a niece that's still alive. This is just 60s, 70s. This isn't like the 19th century. We're not talking about slavery here, right? Like we're talking about something that's very recent in our history. And, let's just give an homage to the new ancestor, Judith Heumann, who was instrumental in the passage of the IDEA, instrumental in the passage of the Rehabilitation Act, which is how we get Section 504, right? So, but Joy, people use Joy's name a lot in DC right now, right? Like, they did a ribbon cutting and they had her sister come and they talked about the bad old days and all that stuff. But my thoughts, and I want to get you guys' thoughts here, is that do they sound much? Now there was a case, remember, on We the Motherhood, we talked about it, right? At a school where kids are literally still being physically abused. So it's not even just yesterday, right? Maybe not as pervasive.
Like that case is like Chioma, that case is still active. It's still ongoing. It's in the court right now. Like, and that I think was filed in 2020, 2021 against River Terrace. And honestly, that's what I thought about. I thought about this is happening in the 60s. And I'm like, well, is there anything really changing? Because Yaida Ford, and shout out to Yaida, she's a dynamite attorney, just filed against DCPS in regards to something very similar.
Now, mind you, remember at oversight hearings, many parents testified that, St. Coletta's is at risk of being closed.
I heard
Where are all those students going to go?
I heard that.
River Terrace.
First of all, River Terrace is not going to be able to take all those children. Number one. So number two, like, are they gonna go to non-publics, or are they just gonna invest in the school to make sure that they have what they need? Because you can't give them equal funding. That's not gonna work for that school. You have to give St. Coletta equitable funding for the extremely vulnerable population that they are serving. That isn't, I don't think people understand. Children with disabilities, that is a very extreme, vulnerable population.
Yep.
Yeah.
Especially our children that have disabilities who are nonverbal and who
historically
communicate what is going on.
Yeah.
You know, Jeannie, I'm like taking up. Like, what do you think? What are your thoughts on this? I'm trying.
It's so many triggers when we talk about the nonverbal piece. They are vulnerable, but also, even when they are verbal, but they're placed in a private placement where they're used to nonverbal children, it's a problem, because that's not what the school is used to. They're actually, when your child is nonverbal or they're not able to convey their thoughts, they're taken advantage of. And literally, this is just how I feel right now. They're bullied by people who are supposed to be taking care of them. And because they are withholding information from the parents, and their whole goal is to tell you what you want to hear to make you feel better. And when your child's nonverbal, they can't tell you what actually is going on.
That's right.
And when I was looking at the video, I was aging myself. I was like, so this was before I was born. She passed the year I was born. And then you said it closed in 2017.
Oh, no. It didn't close in 2017. The case closed in 2017. But Forest Haven, I believe, closed in the 90s. So that wasn't that long ago either, right?
But why? But why did their case it just recently closed? Like, why?
Well, and I don't think they should have closed it, to be honest. I mean, it's kind of like Blackman Jones, right? Like, they closed the case because the court, has this list of things that the state should do, right? And I guess that list kept evolving and evolving and evolving through the years because they kept fighting for quality. Like, after Joy died, I mean, what is so amazing about Harold and Betty is they just kept going, right? I mean, there were 6 families total that made up that case. This is before Walmart case in the Supreme Court that makes it more difficult to have class action. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult to have classes of cases. At that point, it was 6 people. They didn't have identical situations, but they still constituted a class. So they were organized, right? Organized, unified, and they had protracted vision.
But what LaJoy is saying, not just what she's saying, but what you're talking, I'm thinking. We're talking about the time span of it. Even though they closed the Haven Forest, even though they closed it, the case was still open. So now we have this new case where we're talking about St. Coletta might be closed. So it's a closure, the goal. The closure isn't the goal. The closure is to secure quality places for our children to be taken care of. So you close the case. Did anything change legally for holding these places accountable for the care of our kids?
I mean, quiet as it's kept. Joy entered the facility at 8 years old, right? She was 8 years old. I have a 9-year-old now at home, right? Like, just a year shy. Imagine being separated from your household at that age. Wow. You're nonverbal. You're neurodivergent. But Department on Disability Services, it's got no time for the children, right? Like, you literally have to be 18 plus in order to be considered, on the client list of the DC Department of Disability Services. So when it comes to children under 18 years old, no one is on the job.
And it's like parents have to be and not just parents, I'm going to say caregivers. Caregivers have
I guess Aussie's on the job, but we know they're not.
Like, it's like you got to be caregivers have to be transportation. You got to be the teacher. You got to be the doctor.
Everything.
You got to be the nurse. you got to be the lawyer. And again, this is a part, and I just want to shout out to like all the parents and caregivers out there, but I have to stress there is something very special and there is something very different when you are caring for a child that has disabilities.
Yes.
There is an extra, and you know what I've started to say? I would go like burden of care. You know what? It's not burden of care. It's just a different level of care.
Yes.
It's a different tier. You know, I'm changing my language, you know, y'all. It's a different tier of care. Yeah. And so for them to sit up here and for them to just close that case, it's mind blowing, because it's like, this is a no brainer type of situation where you all just were blatantly, and even the situations now, these things are just blatantly not okay.
Right. They closed the case, but the problems haven't stopped.
The problems haven't been solved. And it's like, I'm thinking, if y'all close St. Coletta, where are these kids supposed to go? Because if you call the non-public,
that's the right question. That's the right question.
If you call the non-public schools, they're booked.
They're booked.
They are booked. Yes. They are actually, they're over capacity. Yep. To try to be able to accommodate the children that really need the levels of care. So
it was never a sustainable solution anyways, right?
Where are they going to go? Oh, they're all going to go to River Terrace. River Terrace is struggling now.
River Terrace is in a lawsuit for abuse. I wouldn't send my child there. Would you?
I'm sorry. It's a no for me.
So on that note, in terms of, we're talking about mental health, right? I tweeted the other day, during the oversight hearings, it was very triggering for me. I was like, I get it. I get why y'all can't really get this together in school-based mental health. You are committed to driving at least Chioma crazy, right? Like, like you are working overtime on making sure I never get off my meds, right? So let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about mental health and special education, both sides of the aisle. So LaJoy, put on your AJE hat, advocate hat, right? We know suspensions, expulsions, seclusions, restraints. Jeannie, I already know you're a veteran in these trenches here. All right. Okay. So one thing, I don't know if you guys.
I put on my AJE.
I can't fool with you, LaJoy. Okay. All right. So reaction here. So again, I'm on a coordinating council for school-based mental health, right? And when special education comes up, so shout out to Children's Law Center, who brought up the fact that many children with disability, with IEPs, are not actually allowed to participate in the multi-tiered system of support, which is the model being used to implement school-based mental health. As in, if your child has an IEP and behavior is not, allotted on that IEP, your child may fall through the cracks in terms of, support and services should they want it and need it. And then if your child is in a self-contained classroom, and the school has tier 1, which is universal programming, or tier 2, which is small group, right? They can't even put our kids in shared music and PE classes, right? So then the kids in the self-contained classes, which are now even going through what it sounds like a separate, they just created an alternate universe for us all together. So they don't even get to benefit in school-wide programming, universal designed things for the school, because your child is in the ghettos or whatever building they're in. Or if your child has IEP, whatever, and it doesn't have behavior, good luck advocating for behavioral health supports because your child has IEP and somehow the payment structure does not commingle. Thoughts?
First of all, you cannot negate or segregate a child's access to city programming. Real talk, honestly, that's against ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, which is something we're fighting through now with out of school time for children with disabilities to be able to access these programs. So you're saying that some children, not all, but some children that don't have behavior concerns on their IEP are not going to be able to access mental health programming. Mental health programming should be available.
They won't be referred to those services because they have IEPs.
Okay, they have,
and perhaps we can try and get Children's Law to come on at some point.
I would love to hear what I need to hear what this is about, because my first reaction is, first of all, like, you can't deny somebody's access to basically mental health or just mental health city programming. That's number one.
Well, they're doing it. I mean, they're doing it because Medicaid, and we're going to talk about Medicaid in a couple of weeks, right? Like Medicaid in schools, the payment structure of Medicaid in schools, kids with IEPs are paid under one billing system, which is at a lower reimbursement rate. And then, Medicaid reimburses at 70%. I think IDEA reimburses at 40%. So like if you get your eyes screened, if the school nurse, other things are covered if your child doesn't have an IEP. If your child has an IEP, then it's related services, and then it becomes accountable to the IDEA, which of course the schools don't want to do. They don't want to be held accountable to the law. I mean, I'm just speculating here in terms of why it's like this, but there are families that have not been able to receive. They've been like, oh yeah, can my child receive, counseling or whatever through school mental health? They're like, no. Schools have said no.
I just keep looking at Jeannie's face like, what the hell?
It's such a weird. So here's the thing. Okay, first of all, I before you got on, LaJoy, I said to everyone, one of the main things when your child has a diagnosis, one of the things the schools try to withhold the most is behavioral support. You have a child who has ADHD and they only want to talk about academics. But for a child who has ADHD, they need support with behavior. They need behavior support. They need to learn how to accommodate themselves, what works. That is one of the most serious things that they always try to leave out and withhold. So now, on that note, whenever you look at behavioral health supports for children with special needs, when I started really digging into it with my kids, I was like, well, shit, all kids need this. All kids need to learn how to connect. All kids need sympathy.
All kids need to learn how to self-regulate. Okay.
Right, all kids need this. So but I'm hearing you.
All people, some of these adults.
Is that the pieces that my boys are required? And for anyone who doesn't know, my children have autism spectrum disorder. Okay, and then they have other, learning disabilities. What my children need to self-regulate and to function in the world as a regular. Any children with an IEP cannot get that, which should be a base and foundation, because your behavior ties in with your ability to be able to learn.
Yeah.
If you don't feel safe, if you're scared, if you're not understanding people's emotions. My son used to be an eloper. For anybody who don't know what elopement means, it means my son was a runner. He would run, and he would run and try to find his brother. He would run because he thinks he's in trouble. Luckily, there's a gate from the highway because he would be hit. Our kids, I'm not saying kids don't need it, but I'm saying our kids need it the most.
Yeah.
So we're taking advantage of parents who don't know that's
exactly
IEP, because the only kids that are going to get it are the parents that had advocates or had the knowledge to advocate for that piece.
Exactly.
That's systematic.
And shout out to the person who just talked about the staffing. They were like, they just don't have the staffing for the therapists and folks who really need to be there. And I just want to say this last thing.
That's Yolanda, who's homeschooling, an option many of us should think about.
I can't afford homeschooling. I wish I could, but I honestly can't afford it. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I am a proud single Black mother.
Me neither, LaJoy.
And I literally
me either, but I think that where there's a will, there's a way. Where there's a system,
cannot afford it. But I want to say this, and then I gotta go get brief from karate. First of all, you ladies are amazing. I'm so happy to see Jeannie. Jeannie, we have to catch up like more. Like, I feel like I haven't talked to you. I feel like the last time I talked to you, I was like probably rambling about, oh my gosh, like, how could the school do this? Why are they not letting our kids back in COVID?
Oh yeah, we were like, what?
We were, yeah, Jeannie and we were on the phone. I was like, Jeannie, I'm like, why are they sending all these children back at one time? This is about to be a disaster. And I'm sorry, not sorry. It was a disaster. It was a complete It was a complete disaster.
It
But I just wanted
continues to be disastrous.
but I just want to say that I love you ladies, and that
Love you too.
on days where I feel like, okay, Lord, why am I doing this? Why am I here? I just don't even want to do this anymore. I come into spaces like this, and it's like, no, we have got to keep fighting for these kids. As long as we have breath in our bodies, we have to keep fighting for our children. And then we have to keep fighting for other children and other families who may not be able to speak up, who may not be in a position or have, honestly, just real talk, the capacity. The capacity to speak up. So like, we have to keep doing what we're doing. I don't know if you guys are going to do this again, but like, please let me know.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a caregiver political education boot camp. So every Friday up until for 10 weeks. So this is week 3. We'll be live streaming, and then on Mondays we have an internal session. So we'll keep it going, and please.
I want to come back, Chioma. This is
yes, please do.
Yeah,
please do. Next Friday, we're going to have Mark Lavoda on here, and he's going to be reporting back about the mayor's budget release, which is going to happen next Thursday.
Is it Wednesday or Thursday?
I think it drops Thursday. Maybe she upped it. Maybe it's Wednesday. I think it's Thursday.
Okay.
And then he's going to say, what does behavioral health have to do with that budget?
Yeah,
so
that's gonna be.
Please come on for reactions.
I want to come on for reactions, and also Chioma, we gotta get Jeannie on We the Motherhood.
Yeah. I mean, Gina, she just dropped a whole bunch of knowledge, and I didn't even know Jeannie was as tough, doing the work that she's doing. I mean, I'm
let me tell you something about Jeannie. First of all,
I'm not surprised at all.
Jeannie rolls up. I remember. No, last story, and then I gotta go for real. When I ran for office back in 2020, Jeannie rolled up. LaJoy, where are you? What do you need me to do? And I need you to come and talk about podcasts. I looked at the phone. I said, yes, ma'am.
I was like, what's your marketing? What we doing? How we gonna pull up?
Like, what you doing? Where you at? Pull up. I need you to pull up.
Hey, listen. So we're gonna end with the week of action in May, and we wanted to impact all of us. So it's not just for cohort members; it's for any parent that and we're deciding what that action will be. Follow up offline. The details we shared offline.
Share that with me so we can let other families know.
Because they keep playing with us in our face. They just don't respect us.
AJE has parent. We have parents going through our parent leadership academy, and so after they finish this, because it happens it's 4 different components that we do. They're fired up and ready. They're just like, we're fired up, we're ready. Where do you
and I can trust AJE is building a strong army in there, right?
It is time for advocacy and policy. And I don't mean no harm, y'all, but there has got to be we have got to do a better job of common sense. And I don't care what nobody say, it's common sense. And when I say common, I mean, we should treat everybody with humanity.
Everybody.
Everyone deserves humanity.
It's baseline.
Everyone.
You shouldn't be leaving children when they're about to take the school bus. They have a disability. Come on.
Come on. You know what I mean? But okay, let me go get this kid. And they're probably looking for me.
So I want to thank you all for joining tonight, and thank you for staying a little extra. I just want to thank.
Chioma.
Love you, Kiss Abria.
I will.
See you in the streets.
Bye, guys.
I want to. Bye. I want to thank our funders for the caregiver for the DC Child Justice Coalition and sponsoring the efforts for this cohort. That's Diversity Funds, Emergent Funds, and we've had many individual donors to Fix Pad as well that help keep the lights on for this project. We thank you very much. We look forward to joining next week. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the budget. Thank you, Jeannie. See you Monday in the lab. We have lots to unpack and uncover, so I look forward to it. And have a great weekend. Be blessed, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.